Romance in RPGs can be a tricky mistress, and sometimes a deeply confusing one. Sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's awkward, and sometimes it feels like it exists in a silo completely disconnected from the story canon. And while that can be a writing problem, I think far more often it's a design problem. So today, let's look at romance in RPGs as a system, and why some games make it sing, while others make it fall flat. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. This is Nick BRPG, where I discuss all things RPG with an emphasis on video essays, system analysis, reviews, and much more. If you enjoy this kind of content, a like, comment, and sub helps me out a lot. I see romance systems as a spectrum. On one end, you have canon romance. Canon romance systems require no player choice in how they unfold. They're pre-written and baked directly into the main narrative. They develop naturally with the flow of the story, much like romance in a novel or a film. The strength here is that the writers have full directorial control. This allows romance to become a core pillar of the main scenario and often enables deeper, more complex emotional arcs. The trade-off, naturally, is player agency. For some players, role-playing means having full control over your protagonist's decisions. And if your favorite ship isn't canon, well, you're SOL. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you get something closer to a full dating sim structure. Here, player choice is king. Who you romance, if anyone, is entirely up to you. The strength is obvious. You can very likely pursue your favorite character, no matter who they are. The downside is that the main scenario usually has to be more dilute, so it doesn't clash with all the possible romance paths the player might choose. In games that aren't explicitly dating sims, which is to say most RPGs with dating sim elements, romance gets cordoned off into optional bonding scenes without touching the main narrative at all. And another downside is that because most of the cast has to remain available for the player, their ability to form relationships with each other is drastically limited. Lastly, you have hybrid systems. Something in the middle. Maybe a game with a linear story and fully written characters, but where the player still gets multiple romance options. I think this approach carries the most risk, but I'll save the deeper analysis here for the final case study in this video. For now, just note that romance systems exist on a design spectrum, and some games try to brave the middle. Let's start with an example of canon romance done right. And the game I want to highlight is Final Fantasy X. A legendary classic at this point, and among its many strengths, I'd argue its romance is one of the biggest reasons it still resonates 25 years later. In case you've been living under a rock for the past 25 years and are the type of person to be watching an RPG romance video who has not played FF10, I'll keep this section as spoiler light as possible, but your discretion is advised. Feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp that I have put on screen if you are not comfortable with any narrative discussion on Final Fantasy X. And I don't think I need to spoil much. The sparks between Titus and Yuna fly almost immediately, and it feels organic and natural. This is the advantage of canon romance. The game structurally grants moments, big and small, across the entire playthrough to let the relationship breathe and develop, all the way to its iconic climax. And yes, letting it have its legendary cringe moment along the way as well. You know the one. Romance in games pretty much can't get this engaging without full directorial control. For my money, if you want narratively integrated, emotionally realized romance in RPGs, FF10 is as good as it gets. You lose player agency, sure, but you gain peace of mind that you're not missing flags, and you gain the spectacle of romance that actually matters to the story. Pivoting closer to the other side of the spectrum, you get player choice sim romance. I don't have much experience with dating sims proper, but I do play Persona, and it's safe to say that sim elements are core to the modern Persona games, and that romance falls heavily on that side of the spectrum. And for the most part, I think Persona handles this well. These systems aren't side content, they're core gameplay loops that grant tangible mechanical advantages when engaged with smartly. Because of that, romance feels substantial. You feel like you're actually romancing a character, or characters for the absolute menaces among you, of their interest. But the wrinkles still show. Romance stays almost entirely contained to optional bonding events, with little to no impact on the main scenario. This is most palpable when it's a party member who you've romanced. Still, I would say Persona 3, 4, and 5 are examples of this romance structure done right. Even if romance and main narrative run parallel instead of intersecting, both are fleshed out enough to feel satisfying on their own. Next, I want to look at a hybrid structure and the risks of smashing player agency and a fully written protagonist together. My case study here is The Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel. And hold your horses, Trails fam. Yes, I'm about to be critical of Trails of Cold Steel's romance structure, but Trails is still my favorite series. Which, honestly, is probably why I care enough to be this annoying about it. Okay? You pilot Reen, a fully realized character, not a self-insert, and unlike earlier Trails games or most story-rich JRPGs, you're given many choices for him during his downtime, including who to romance. Across the series, the list of romanceable characters expands, but that noise is beyond the scope of this discussion. The broader structure is what we are focusing on here. Unlike Persona, where sim systems are core gameplay pillars, romance in Cold Steel is much more of a side element. There are fewer scenarios, fewer moments, and they don't go nearly as far. And unlike Persona, where many romanceable characters live primarily in the sim layer, Cold Steel's romance options are all main cast members, with major story roles. This sounds good in theory, but in practice, it creates massive problems. When you're 4 games deep into dating the same character, it starts to feel tone deaf and honestly kind of exhausting that other girls keep throwing themselves at you when you've already been dating best girl Emma for like 4 games straight. It feels shallow because your actual relationship never meaningfully affects the narrative, and it feels much worse when one unchosen character is clearly the dev's favorite canon girl anyway. Let's dig into some quick reasons why this feels bad psychologically. First, emotional stakes collapse when the romance doesn't affect the canon. The illusion evaporates quickly, and romantic moments, which in Cold Steel rarely go too far anyway, start to feel less like romance and more like extremely polite fan service. Choice feels fake when outcomes are siloed, especially across multiple games, when girls you aren't dating treat you like you're available, while the girl you are dating feels like she resets to square one every time you see her. Characters feel less real when relationships freeze in amber. Your romance partner becomes 2 separate characters, the platonic friend in the main story, and the significant other in the bonding scenes. And finally, and this is a big one, the wider cast gets stifled. Huge swaths of Cold Steel's cast are functionally forced into lifelong emotional stasis, because the player might have flirted with them 9 games ago. I'm playing Trails Beyond the Horizon right now, the 13th game, and when a newer character asks someone introduced in game 4 out, the answer is just, I think she has feelings for someone else. That was 6 years ago in game canon, and the player might not have even chosen her. Before wrapping up, I want to be fair and say hybrid systems definitely can work, and the standout example is Baldur's Gate 3. I don't think I need to say much here. BG3 is famous for giving players enormous freedom and actually following through on the consequence of all of those choices. That depth cascades into its romance systems. Like Persona, most romantic development happens in optional interactions, but also like Persona, the writing investment is deep enough that those relationships feel meaningful and impactful. Still, I'd call Baldur's Gate 3 the exception that proves the rule. Yes, this can be done, but only if you're willing to put in truly absurd amounts of narrative labor, and most studios simply aren't up to that task. To summarize, fans of my channel will know that I generally prefer linear, story-rich games. So it probably won't surprise you that canon romance is generally my favorite structure. Let romance be part of the narrative, not something that exists alongside it in a separate silo. I don't think player choice is fundamentally bad design, but sim-like systems inherently impose a massive burden on developers, how or whether to integrate those relationships into the wider narrative. And when games don't commit fully, you get systems where players technically have choices, but none of them feel meaningful. And to me, that's the worst of both worlds. Romance systems fail when there's an identity mismatch between player role and narrative structure. This is the proverbial case of when designers don't pick a lane, they try to design a game for everyone, and end up designing a game for no one. Well, that's all I've got for today's video. For those of you with a significant other, I hope you cherish them and have a wonderful Valentine's Day. And for those of you who are single and not by choice, I wish you happiness in your search for love. And to all of you, thanks for taking a little time out of your day for watching this little YouTuber wax poetic about RPG romance systems. This is Nick BRPG. The discourse will continue. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.